Thank you for joining me in this special edition. Thank you ahead of time for subscribing, either on YouTube, Rumble, or the many audio platforms where this program is heard. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for liking. I appreciate that. We live in a day of delusion. People have exchanged the truth for a lie. We've had 3 generations, particularly here in the United States, that have been indoctrinated to believe crazy stuff. You've heard me speak about the environment. Well, now we get onto something even greater than that. And that's the hatred that's been unleashed on this planet from a particular sect that believes they have the corner on the market when it comes to God and spirituality and the way the rest of us shall live. I was involved in a radio interview yesterday. I'm not going to mention the station or the program, but during the course of my talk regarding the situation in Israel and the situation in Palestine, and I was trying to bring some history to the equation because I believe that in order to have a great understanding of these issues of the day, you have to understand the historical, and I've done podcasts on that, which you can see. It was as if all of my words just faded away into nothingness, and callers came on, and right away the callers began blaming Israel for its many atrocities. And I said, could you please name one atrocity for me? And of course they couldn't. And another caller came on and said, Israel brought this on themselves. The Jews brought this on themselves. They've been asking for it. They've been a menace. They've been harmful. They've been hurtful. I said, what are you even talking about? Again, no response. And then another person decided to rip into me. Well, I've heard you on the radio many times. And, you know, having been on the radio for so many years, I get a sense for what's going on as soon as people start talking. This one person came on and said glowing things about me, and I could tell, okay, I'm waiting for things to turn any moment. And then they said, I've heard you on the radio before. I know you've talked about being Jewish, and I really don't talk about that. I've heard you on the radio before. I know you've talked about being Jewish, and you know that the Jews have done a lot to bring this on themselves. Are we back in Nazi Germany? I was driving by a pro-Palestinian rally. I'm not going to name the town last Friday. And when I saw the young kids with Jews for Palestine, it was everything I could do to prevent myself from jumping out of the vehicle and shouting, are you crazy? Go into one of those territories and try being Jewish for 1 minute. When I saw the gays for Palestine, I thought, are you crazy? Go into one of those territories and try being outwardly gay for 10 minutes. You'll be tortured for the first 9.5 before they finally do you in. If I could only speak to some of these mind-numb robots and say, do you understand the word Hamas means violence? Do you get that? Do you understand that there really was torture going on during that invasion? Do you understand that? Well, they would probably say, like so many, that's all propaganda. That didn't happen. It's a day of delusion. Besides my new radio show on KSFO in San Francisco every Wednesday from 6 to 7, forgive me as I get a little emotional here, I also do a radio show on KAZM in Sedona, Arizona. It airs throughout northern Arizona every Friday morning from 8 to 9 a.m. And on this most recent broadcast, we interviewed the guy who is my favorite congressman right now, Eli Crane. He's a freshman congressman from Arizona. Eli Crane is a former Navy SEAL. He did 13 years in the SEALs. He joined the SEALs after 9/11. He was a college student, said, that's it. I got to do something. I'm out of college. I'm going to the Navy. I want to be a SEAL. And he became a SEAL. 13 years. many deployments, as you will hear. He was our guest on this radio station, KAZM, which, by the way, turns into a podcast. You can hear it, the entire interview at straighttalksedona.com. But I'm going to take a portion of that interview because I want to play it on my own podcast. It's so important that you hear what this guy has to say about this current enemy in Israel. And then I ask him the question, Congressman, what keeps you up at night? And he goes on to talk about our border. And he gives you some statistics. The statistics he's going to present are from the last 2 years during the Biden administration. The MAMs, military age males that have been caught at the border trying to come into the United States of America. Tens of thousands. Military age men from countries that are known for being terrorism hotbeds and Islamic hotbeds. They were caught at our border. Now, we don't know how many were never caught, but you'll hear the numbers. They were caught at our border. And the tragedy is we don't know, because the Biden administration won't tell anybody. We don't know how many of them were turned away, how many of them were detained, or how many were just let into the country with a piece of paper saying, here's your court date. We'll look into your situation a bit later. And then I asked him about the person working for the Department of Homeland Security in charge of asylum, who had 2 posts recently, 2 social media posts that said, Free Palestine, and the other one said, F Israel. And she still works for the department. So you're going to hear a portion of our interview with Eli Crane. What a great American this man is. So my first question to the congressman is this, and again, this is given all of his military background and having seen this enemy up close and personal. I asked him, what was your reaction? What were you thinking when you found out that Israel was under attack?
Well, I was pretty disgusted, like a lot of Americans, at just seeing the brutality, the carnage. I think this attack was sadistic.
But it probably didn't surprise you, did it? I mean,
that's where I was just going to go. It really did surprise me because I know the mentality of some of these folks. It really would shock a lot of Americans if they saw it on full display. They saw it in 9/11, and they've been exposed to it here and there and over the news over the course of decades, but many of them haven't. They've never fought against it. They've never been really close to it. And it's hard for, I think, Westerners to understand the ideology. And the sad thing is there are folks within this very body that, I would say share the same ideology. It's why they won't condemn these brutal attacks. But, it reminds all Americans why we need to continue to support Israel, because they are and have been our number one ally for decades. And they are surrounded by people that have ideologies that, want to wipe them off the face of the earth. But that being said, I want to remind everybody, this is what we do all the time in Washington, D.C. Something happens around the world. It takes our attention away from, protecting the American people and our number one priority. And our number one priority, in my opinion, has to be protecting the American people, protecting our homeland. Right now, we have a wide open southern border. We've had 250 individuals on the terror watch list in the last 2 years that have been encountered by Border Patrol. And I've got a list right here. These are some numbers for your viewers. We've had 6,886 individuals from Afghanistan, over 3,000 from Egypt. Iran, we've had close to 700 individuals encountered at the southern border. Syria, 538. Uzbekistan, 13,624. Turkey, 30,000. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And it's like, if you don't think for a second there's individuals in this country right now who are lone wolves or operating within a terror cell that are just waiting for the, orders to start attacking infrastructure, killing Americans, you're a fool. These people, many of them consider us to be the great Satan, and they want to destroy us. Just like, and they have similar ideas about us as they do about, Israel. And so we have to take this very seriously. We can't keep playing partisan politics with the security of American people who count on us to keep them safe. I mean, that's our number one responsibility outside of protecting their unalienable God-given rights. And it pisses me off, guys, because I'm in the Homeland Security Committee when I hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who, not only won't condemn some of these attacks, but, won't even admit that, a fence or a border wall is an important part of, a border security system. It's really hard to keep people safe when you can't even admit that there's a reason why prisons have walls. There's a reason why schools have walls. There's a reason why castles had walls, right? These things, they're not security by themselves, but in a system with trained Border Patrol agents, technology, intelligence, all of that, all of those deterrents together equal a security system. And that's one of the first things that we have to put back in place if we're going to keep the American people safe.
Boy, listening to you, you have so much credibility because you've seen this enemy up close and personal. And I have a pit in my stomach listening to you because I know you're speaking the truth, and I just realized we're not doing enough. You put out a press release, Congressman, talking about Joe Biden and his administration unchaining $6 billion for use by the Islamic Republic of Iran with no accountability. One has to wonder how much of that money was being used to put this operation together, or for future operations, maybe even planned against the United States of America, the great Satan, as you mentioned.
Yeah. That's definitely, a very good point.
Right.
And so the problem is, in many ways, because we're so foolish, in many ways, we end up funding this type of terrorism, whether it's in Iran or whether it's Hamas or with other groups around the world. And I think it's a, you could argue, is it stupidity or is it, nefarious, within our own government, and how we don't understand how this ends up playing out around the world. But we need to wise up, and we need to implement some of the serious sanctions that, we've had in the past with some of these terror organizations and with Iran. And when you cut off a lot of the money and the foreign aid that goes to these groups, then a lot of that money can't be used in terror attacks and then be, weaponized against the very people that are paying for it.
Congressman, I want to ask you about Nujwa Ali. She's the asylum officer from the Department of Homeland Security. You were the first person I heard of, actually the only person I've heard of, to actually call this woman out and ask the Department of Homeland Security to fire her. Could you give our listeners and our viewers a little bit of background, please?
Basically, for those of your viewers that aren't aware, recently it was found that a former spokeswoman for the Palestinian Liberation Organization,
this is amazing,
is now an asylum officer for the Department of Homeland Security. And right after the attacks in Israel with Hamas, I believe on the 7th, she posted a social media post that had an individual hanging under a paraglider with a gun in his hand, saying "Free Palestine," right? And so for those of you that aren't aware, these hang gliders were one of the very means of infiltration that Hamas used to go butcher and kill Israelis. One of her other posts, Miss Ali exclaims, "F Israel and any Jew who supports them." And this individual is responsible and has influence of who comes into this country, who gets asylum or not. Do you think that, that individual with that type of character might let individuals into this country that don't have Americans' best interests at heart, or maybe, Jewish Americans in best interests in mind? Absolutely not. This is disgusting. She needs to be fired immediately. And there need to be probably an investigation looked into, what type of vetting did this individual get? But once again, we see that this administration, once again, is not only not protecting the American people, but instead of being America first, their agenda quite often is America last.
So you write this letter to the Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, calling for this woman's immediate termination. Again, she has these two brazen posts, just to be so bold to put this out there, free Palestine, and then the F Israel, any Jew who supports Israel. And there's been nothing. It's incredible. It's as if you're making this stuff up, and it was all out there for everybody to see.
Yeah, it's awful, guys. But I mean, when you look at so many of the other things that this administration is up to, even at our southern border, I mean, it almost seems like they do the exact opposite of common sense every single time.
I mean, sometimes I get the feeling we're sitting ducks. What's to say we couldn't have another major attack on our homeland? I'm asking you this, Congressman, not just as a representative of the people in the United States of America's Congress, but as a guy who is a former Navy SEAL who's seen this enemy up close and personal.
And it's just a matter of time, in my opinion, before you see another, 9/11 style attack on, the U.S. homeland. I read you the numbers of the individuals, or some of the numbers of the individuals and the countries that they've come from. And like I said, if you don't think within that 1.7 million gotaways, there's individuals, that we don't know who they are, we don't know where they're going, we don't know what their intentions are, that would do harm to Americans, you're an absolute fool.
So I'm just asking you, I know, you've seen a lot, and most of it, will never be told. Most of your stories will never be told, and probably for good reason. But I just have to ask you, Congressman, given everything you've seen, everything you know, and all that you've learned being a congressman in the United States of America, what's keeping you up at night these days?
Oh, I mean, it's a very long list, but this is at the top of it. Knowing that my job, what a priority it is in my job, in our job, to protect the American people, knowing that we're not doing it, knowing that an event like 9/11, how many families it destroyed, how many communities it destroyed. It changed my life forever. I dropped out of school the very next week and joined the military and served for 13 years. I went on 5 wartime deployments. That had a major impact on my family as well. And just knowing that to me, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when that happens. That's what keeps me up at night. And also our national debt keeps me up at night, because I know that no country in the history of the world could continue to do what we do here, continually print money that we don't have, spend money that we don't have, and then go home and gaslight our voters and try and pretend that we're conservative. And so those are the things that keep me up at night. That being said, I'm gonna keep working here. You guys, you're stuck with me for at least, another, 14 months, and I'm running again. But if I'm not successful in winning this race, then I'll go back to spending time with my family. But those are the things that keep me up at night.
Well, you just had a chance to meet Congressman Eli Crane. And by the way, I'll just say one more thing about the congressman. Newt Gingrich, at one time I had a lot of respect for Newt Gingrich, but I've lost all of that respect, especially most recently when there was this debate for a new speaker in the House. And Eli Crane was one of the crazy 8, one of the rebels that was really standing in the gap to make sure we had a conservative running the Republican side of the aisle. Well, now we have Mr. Johnson, and by all accounts, he's a pretty good guy. But Eli Crane was one of the 8 congressmen standing in the gap, holding out. Now, you heard his story. Newt Gingrich referred to Eli Crane and the other 7 as being traitors. Shame on Newt Gingrich. To call a man who pledged his life, his sacred honor, his fortune for this country, dropping out of school after 9/11 to get in the fight like few ever get into the fight. Calling him a traitor, that is beyond the pale. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this interview. I hope you will share it. It's quite telling, correct? I mean, there was a point in time, as you saw earlier, where I was just getting choked up talking about this. And I'm choked up right now as well because my country, our country, is going through gyrations that the founders, I don't believe, ever imagined possible. But we live in a day of delusion, and all the more reason for us to stay in the fight and become equipped with the truth. And don't forget to pray for our nation. Oh, God, that there would just be an outpouring of your spirit on this land. Please subscribe. Please share. Thanks for all of your support. God bless you. God bless the United States of America.